Welcome to today's edition of the Human School's Mindshift Cards Conversation, a part of our learning journey here at the Human School. I'm Chad.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Randy.
Each week, we hope to model brief inquiry conversations around one of our Mindshift cards. If you want to explore further questions, there are card sets available at thehuman.school. In this episode, the question comes from our objector compass point, and the question is, what impact does having a title have on leadership and expectations of leadership? Are those fair? And how might these titles impact leadership opportunities within a system? So our big question here this week is really around leadership. And to kick us off, I think that where I would like to start is that sometimes when people have titles, there's an expectation of those I don't love this language, those who fall underneath them, they end up kind of waiting for to be led. And so there's this clear delineation between those with the title as leader and those who don't have a title as follower. And I just think that it's so contextual. And I think that when, as leaders, we aren't willing to break those barriers down and kind of flatten hierarchy a little bit in our practices, then you end up with a lot of people waiting for a savior. And I think that that's a real challenge in our current education system. There are a lot of people who are kind of waiting around for somebody else to come in and step in and lead. So that's my perspective on this question.
Yeah, I think about the level of the title and the assumption of intellect or ability that tends to come with it. The belief that, oh, if you have a doctorate, there's this level of intelligence. If you have a master's degree, it's this, bachelor's degree, it's this. And also the absence of a title means that you are not intelligent or you're not capable. So I think a lot about that assumption. I know in some environments, there's an expectation that you just keep increasing your title, and that that signals to your colleagues or to your higher ups or to your employees that you're serious about the work. So I think that there's an interesting assumption of intellect attached, as well as the lack of leadership means that you don't have that intellect. So that's the one that I think about a lot.
So connecting to your comment, Rachel, we do a lot of signaling in this area of leadership. And I think you pointed out a lot of those things too. The degree, the school you went to, whether your title is unique or whether it's kind of like 5 other people or 500 other people, that sort of is a signal of competence or expertise. And sometimes it is, but oftentimes it isn't. And I think that's where we get disappointed. I also think that our system is structured almost like a parent-child relationship. And the children in the system, the people without the formal titles, look to the parent for the answers, for the direction. And even though we're all adults, and I don't blame the children for thinking that way, or for the parent for thinking that they have some sort of like privileged set of power, but our society in all different levels, not just in schools, has created this sort of parent-child model. And one of the ways that we need to object is we need to think about how does that power get distributed? And maybe that's not even the right word, because that assumes that there's no power there and I now need to give it to you. But the power is already there in the people that might view themselves as the child in relationship to the parent. And is it the role of the person with the power, the leader, the person with the title, whatever you want to describe it as, to find ways to pull out that power within everybody? Because the problems that we have now, this work that we're talking about right here, just about transforming schools, isn't going to happen through one person.
Right.
It's going to happen through the collective intelligence, action, and beliefs of everybody. And how do we sort of push back against that old way of structuring power and leadership?
I think that you said something there that I really connected with, which it is up to each individual person to make that decision. So wherever you are within an ecosystem, you have to be willing to give up that power, right? So as teachers, we oftentimes are frustrated by, what happens when something gets, there's an edict from above. And then the question I oftentimes have is, okay, as a teacher, if that doesn't feel great, that you're being mandated to do something that you don't understand or you don't like or doesn't make sense or isn't relevant, how do you then transfer that then? Do you then transfer that to kids? If you're a building principal and you're, being mandated from district office, or your district office and you're being mandated from the state, like there are places where you just have to do the thing that you're required to do. We can object to those and do them in a way that's more human. But I think to your point, Randy, it's the acknowledgement of each individual person who says, if my job is to distribute this power to ensure that everyone's voice is heard and that they feel seen and valued, it is a part of this conversation, then it requires every single person in the system to filter it through that lens.
Yeah, I agree. I was also thinking too, Randy, as you were talking about the assumption of the degree means that you're great at everything, right? That even though our degrees are theoretically specialized, right? And sometimes broadly specialized, but still that there's an assumption, and it's even outside of education, right? Like I taught an argument class, and one of the things that I would try to help students understand is quoting somebody with a doctorate, Dr. So-and-so is great, except if their doctorate is in biochemistry and they're talking about virology, those two things may not align, or, it could be even more extreme. We see it sometimes in politics that you have people who refer to themselves as Dr. So-and-so. And so it feels like that person then really is an authority on politics because that's their job. Except when you look at it, it's like a completely unrelated, not political degree. So I think that sometimes there's an assumption of intellect in all things too. And I think it is a sad sort of opportunity for teachers sometimes when we assume, oh, well, they just know everything. And then I think two things kind of occur depending on your personality, is that either you wait, like we've been talking about, for that person to just make all the decisions, or you think that when you have a different opinion, it must not be good enough. It must not be smart enough. And you actually may be more seasoned in that topic or that issue than the person with the degree. So I agree that waiting, I think, is a bit of an issue, because I think it assumes that, they're the only one with any power, and they're the only one with any of the know-how, and that's not true. So it leads me to kind of wondering about how we can set up systems, both as leaders and as teachers, to allow for, even if it's not a power distribution, to allow space for everybody to participate in whatever the conversation is, and in a genuine way, not in a, I'm going to listen to your opinion and then I'm going to do what I want. I wonder about that, how we can create those systems and what we can do for ourselves too, because not only do teachers need to recognize their own control and power in situations, but being able to be reflective of our own egos. Are we willing to step aside and allow other people to participate equally in a conversation? Or is it like an ego threat and we end up kind of getting in the way? So those would be my wonders.
I wonder how we bridge the chasm between our beliefs and our actions. And I think that we would, if we go back to the parent-child relationship, those who are in the child relationship in the organization, or the child role in the organization, believe that they would like to have some voice. I think that's a natural human thing. And yet they're not willing to object, to put themselves out there. So my curiosity is around sort of the emotional divide, the emotional barrier, I should say, that we have to overcome to have the courage to voice our opinion and to object to things in a way, like Chad always likes to say, that's not disagreeable, but that actually allows us to exercise the agency and the power that we do have.
I mean, I think a lot about, Brene Brown when she talks about rumbling, and she's talked about the vulnerability it takes, and then I connect to kind of Todd Rowe's collective illusion, in that there are a lot of things that we agree to, socially speaking, within schools, I believe, that we all know is not great, but we kind of just accept it. And we're not willing to vocalize it. And you hear things like, if I say this, I'm going to get in trouble. Or if I do it, this way, I'm going to get in trouble. And as someone who sat on, I was a teacher for many years and then an administrator for 4 at the district office level, I can't think of a time that I had a conversation with a teacher where they objected to something that my immediate thought was how disrespectful or rude you are. It doesn't always feel comfortable, but this idea of I'm going to get into trouble, it's just always one that's a barrier that I don't know how. And again, I think, Randy, to your point about this child and parent relationship as being a big part of that, I'm not sure how to bridge that gap other than to encourage vulnerability. And I think that as leaders in an organization, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a parent, whether you're whoever you are, right? If we believe that the capacity to lead is within everybody, then we have to be willing, when we start to get that tingling of someone's kind of coming at me or they're asking a question that doesn't make us feel comfortable, leaning into curiosity as opposed to leaning into being angry and upset. That's hard. And again, as Rachel, you talked about that reflection piece. So, I'll kind of wrap up. I think my big question here is really tied to both of your questions, which is that how do we empower people? And I hate that word empower because it implies this thing that we're doing for other people. Sure. So I'm going to in the moment be reflective of that and say, how do we create the conditions in which people feel like they can be vulnerable enough to object so that it strengthens the organization? I think objecting strengthens an organization. I think that part of the problem we have is this belief that challenging or objecting weakens. And I actually think it creates strength in an organization. I expressed once this week that I find the most frustrating thing is when an organization is unwilling to challenge its assumptions about what's working and what's not working. It's easier just to say everything's fine than it is to really challenge how we can become better. So my big curiosity, I think, is really around creating conditions of vulnerability.
If I can interject real quick too, I think that objection that everybody participates in is part of what strengthens it, because the belief that change lies with one person. I don't know what the right version of lie and lay is there. But that it stays with one person, that means that it dies with one person too, if that person leaves, and that's not how we sustain it too. So going back to your point about the ability to sustain it, it has to be distributed. It has to be participated in by everybody in order for it to stay, in order for it to continue to improve. Sorry.
No, I appreciate that. So we know that all good inquiries lead to more curiosity, and we hope that as your mind begins to shift, you'll share your thoughts and ideas with us and our community at the Human.School. Thanks so much for learning alongside us in this edition of the Human School's Mindshift Cards Conversation. Visit the Human.School and its Learning and Public Hub for additional resources and to join the conversation. And please visit our Facebook community, committed to placing humanity at the center of all design. It was great chatting with you guys this morning.
Bye.
All right. As always, bye-bye.